welcome to Her Huddle, where we're going to be speaking to the talismanic women in and around the NFL, from front offices to sidelines, broadcast booths, and everywhere in between. This sport is for everyone, and we are so excited to celebrate it. And I'm delighted to say that Phoebe Schechter, the first British woman to coach in the NFL, despite her accent, is alongside me. And Phoebe, there are some brilliant stories, aren't there, of women to tell who've trailblazed in this sport that we love.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, from all different spaces, from scouting to coaching. And this year in particular, we've had 15 female coaches within the league, the most that has ever been. So the ceiling, the sky is the limit.
Yeah, those grass ceilings don't exist anymore. And there are so many great women that have done amazing things in this league. And you might not have heard their names before. And that is what Her Huddle is here to fix. And we're getting started with the woman who is truly the first lady of the NFL. Amy Trask was the very first woman to become CEO of an NFL team when Al Davis put her in charge of the then Oakland Raiders in 1997. After 16 years at the helm, she stepped away in 2013 and has since worked as an analyst for CBS, written a brilliant book, and is chairperson of the board for the Big Three Professional Basketball League. Plus, she's a trained lawyer. She really can do it all. Amy Trask, it is kind of hard to know exactly where to start with your fairly incredible, pretty multifaceted career. So I guess the beginning makes the most sense. Where did your love of football come from, and how did your career in football start?
Well, I fell in love with the game of football when I was in junior high. It was the first time I had ever, and junior high back in the day when I went started in 7th grade. Now it starts at a different time here. It was 7th grade, and I went to my first ever in-person football game, and I fell in love with the game. You know, yes, it is a game with speed and power and strength, but it's also a very cerebral game. It's a game of matchups, and I was immediately intrigued by those matchups. It's like a game of chess with very fast, very strong, very powerful chess pieces. How does your pass rush match up against my pass protection, and vice versa? How do your defensive backs match up against my receivers, and vice versa? So I fell in love with the game of football when I was in junior high. That's when it all started. I grew up in Los Angeles. I didn't have a favorite NFL team as I was growing up, but I went to college at Cal Berkeley. And at the time, this was before Al Davis moved the team to Los Angeles. So the Raiders were just down the road from where I went to college. And I fell in love with everything about the team. You know, you would watch teams play road games, and the team bus would pull up and out would come the players in sports coats and carrying briefcases and looking quite professional. And then you would see the Raiders, and the door of the bus would open and they would just tumble out wearing whatever the heck they were wearing. And I loved that. And I also loved that Al Davis hired, or signed, I should say, players and hired others who had been reported to be, quote, behavior problems. He gave people second chances and third chances and even more chances. And as someone who had been labeled a behavior problem in kindergarten, that resonated with me. So I fell in love with the game in junior high and with the Raiders when I went to college.
You clearly fell in love with the Raiders, studying law, going to law school, the rest of it. It's sort of a chicken and egg situation. What came first, the desire to work in the law or the opportunity to intern in the legal team at the Raiders?
I went to law school for the education. I thought that the education would be very valuable in business, and it was. So I went to law school after leaving Cal. As it happened, coincidentally, the year that I graduated Cal Berkeley and moved back home to Los Angeles to go to law school was the same year Al ultimately moved the team to LA. And I picked up the phone and called the Raiders and said, I'd like to be an intern. And that's when it began.
There's a little bit of a gap, isn't there, between your internship and then you sort of starting to work for the Raiders permanently. So what did you do in the interim, and how did you end up going back to the team?
I was joined a law firm, and about a year into my career, roughly a year, got a phone call from someone with the Raiders saying they had decided to hire another lawyer and did I want the job. And I ran so fast to give notice to the managing partner of the law firm that if Al Davis had seen how fast I ran, he might have signed me to play cornerback. And I gave notice and I joined the Raiders.
Within 10 years, you were CEO, which by anyone's sort of measurements, yardstick, is a tremendous rise. I mean, what was the journey like for you once you were in the organization and it was, your permanent job?
I had no plan for advancement. I had no strategy. I was so thrilled to be part of the organization. I'll say the same thing I said with respect to the internship, absolutely the same case. Whatever I could do to contribute, I was thrilled to do. I didn't have a trajectory in mind. I didn't have a plan in mind. At some point during that period of time, someone for whom I have tremendous respect said to me, Amy, you have to have a plan. You have to have a 5-year plan. And I looked at this person and said, I don't want a plan. I certainly don't want a 5-year plan. And I was somewhat sarcastic and said that 5-year plan didn't work out so well for the Russians, did it? But I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a goal of a title in mind. Titles have never been important to me. I think titles are just sometimes irrelevant, sometimes even worse. I wanted to contribute, and I wanted to contribute however I could. I was thrilled to be part of the team. I did contribute however I could. If the ticket office was busy and the phones were ringing off the hook, I went in and answered phones. I didn't identify myself. I picked the phone up and said, Raiders, how may I help you? I did that before I was the CEO. I did that after I was the CEO. The best advice I've ever received in my life was from my mom. She told me this from the time I was a very little girl, and as moms can do, she told it to me over and over and over again. And as girls can do, every time she did, I rolled my eyes like, oh my gosh, are you telling me this again? But she was right. And it's the best advice I've ever received. And it was, to thine own self be true. She was, of course, quoting from Shakespeare. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't learn she was quoting from Shakespeare until I was in college, sort of embarrassing for me. But my point is this. What I did worked for me, and I sure hope it works for you if that's how you choose to proceed. It doesn't mean that it's right for everyone. Some people want to have a plan. Some people want to plan out their trajectory. I didn't want to. I proceeded as you are proceeding. It worked for me. It doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody.
I'm guessing you worked very closely with a certain legend of the sport, of the game, Al Davis, throughout your entire tenure at the Raiders. What was your relationship like, especially in those early years? And sort of, you must have got on his radar fairly early on to become CEO 10 years later.
The biggest misconception about Al Davis is that one can't disagree with him, that he wouldn't tolerate disagreement, and that he wouldn't tolerate people who disagreed with him. If that was the case, I would have been fired, I don't know, roughly 2.5 weeks after I was hired. I was sitting in the office with a coworker. He walked in and he ripped into this coworker. Oh my gosh, it's like I imagine a velociraptor would have ripped into flesh. And as I listened to him really hollering at this coworker, I realized he was wrong. So I interrupted or interjected, and I don't have a dainty voice at the best of times, certainly not when I'm hollering. And I said, excuse me, you're wrong. And I had to speak loudly because he was speaking loudly. And I was very direct. I said, excuse me, you're wrong. I will forever remember the look on his face when his head spun around and he looked at me. And I continued. I said, you're wrong. If the facts upon which you were basing your conclusion were accurate, then it would be a fair conclusion. But you are basing your conclusion on inaccurate information, inaccurate facts, inaccurate data, and it's wrong. Well, he yelled at me and I yelled back, and he yelled and I yelled, and this went on for quite a while as we argued. And I learned much, much later that, well, people from throughout the organization heard us hollering, and they gathered outside the office in which we were sitting. They couldn't see in, but they could hear, and they gathered. And I learned much, much later that someone actually brought boxes because she figured, all right, Amy's going to have to pack her stuff after this. Well, after quite a lengthy argument, he looked at me and he's like, oh, okay, I got it. I gotcha. And we went right on to continue the conversation. And I think that set the tone for our working relationship.
What was it like, and what was the response to you? You know, because you were the first woman to be in those league meetings, in those owners' meetings. What was the response to you from other people in the room? Because you might not have really been considering it and being focused on the job at hand, but there must have been some interactions and that suggested that this wasn't the usual, this was different.
It was very, very early in my career that Al asked me to accompany him to an NFL owners meeting. And at the time, the league and the Raiders were involved in litigation. Some of the legends of the game, Lamar Hunt. Oh, and for those of your listeners who may not know this, the men I'm about to name owned other teams. Lamar Hunt, Dan Rooney, Ralph Wilson, Wellington Mara. Those were 4 team owners who were just the backbone of the league and very much opposed to the position that Al and the Raiders had taken in that litigation. And yet each one of them made a point of extending himself to me at my very first meeting and welcoming me and offering me support and encouragement. That surprises a lot of people because my first owners meeting was in the 1980s, the late 80s, but the 1980s. That was a long time ago. And yet these men who were on the opposite side of litigation offered me their support and encouragement. And these men were the stalwarts of the league.
That's so interesting to hear as well. And that there was always that openness perhaps, but there were just no other leaders like Al Davis who were, you know, identifying female executives or willing to give those roles and put the women in those positions, because historically it just hadn't been done.
There will be people who are listening to this conversation who can't stand the Raiders and who couldn't stand Al Davis. But if we're all being intellectually honest about him, he did something that everyone should do. He hired without regard to race, gender, ethnicity, or any other individuality, which has no bearing whatsoever on whether one can do a job. And he did that before these were topics of conversation.
When you look now and sort of connected to that you were the first female CEO or president of an NFL team back in 1997, 25 years later, we still haven't had that many. Kim Pegula, we've had at your old team, the Raiders as well. Sandra Douglas Morgan has recently been appointed the president, but there's still not very many. Now, for you, is that frustrating? And this occurred to me as I was thinking about this earlier, is it frustrating that there's been so few? Or do you look at the overall structure of the league and see women in many different positions, from officiating to coaching and all the many areas behind the scenes and broadcast, and go, well, actually, they will rise to the top, but there's more of them there now, so it's kind of a success. So where do you land on it?
Well, you probably saw me start to smile ear to ear when you mentioned officiating, and I will tell you why. But yes, throughout the league, and by the way, Sandra has gotten quite a bit of attention. That hire has gotten quite a bit of attention. But there are other terrific women throughout the league. Hannah Gordon with the San Francisco 49ers. She's general counsel and has another title, EVP or COO. I apologize. I don't remember her exact title because, as I said, I don't focus on titles, but she is very senior in the 49er organization. Jeannie Bonk, extremely senior in the Charger organization, the most senior person who's not related to the Spanos family. She's terrific. So there are some terrific women at teams, and you're right, there are some terrific women in the league office and throughout the league. And the one that really has me smiling is Sarah Thomas officiating. And the reason is this. I was asked when Sarah was appointed to officiate the Super Bowl, I was asked, I was told, it was mentioned, oh, this is the league checking a box. And I laughed when I heard that. No, the league was not checking a box. The league wants one thing when it comes to officiating a Super Bowl. The league wants the best officials on the field because the league does not want officiating to be the focus after the game. So when the league appointed Sarah Thomas to officiate that game, it's because they believed she was the best in the position she was officiating. I loved it. I think it's great. And you're right, there are women now coaching, and that's terrific as well, because you don't wake up one day and say, I'm going to be a head coach today, or I'm going to be a CEO or a president today. You need to work your way into those roles. So the fact that teams have now opened these pipelines so women can start coaching, so that officials can, and that the league has opened pipelines for officials, I think it's terrific.
Well, some would say, and in fact, Condoleezza Rice said that has a lot to do with you, and that a whole generation of girls now think it's possible to be a part of the infrastructure of the NFL because of what you did.
Hi, Miss Amy.
Yeah.
Amy Trask, former CEO of the Raiders, was pioneer.
You're Amy Trask. You can do this.
Oh, now my name's on the microphone.
It is Amy Trask, our CEO.
She advanced the cause of women in football tremendously. I think a whole generation of girls who now think it's possible to be a part of the infrastructure of the NFL because of what Amy Trask did.
That Condoleezza Rice said that overwhelmed me at the time she did so. It continues to overwhelm me. In fact, when she said that, and I learned of it, I cried. It was so meaningful. I never considered that as I did my job. It's not something I thought about until she said it. But if seeing me do my job inspires someone to think I can do what I want to do as well, then nothing could make me happier.
I know you've spoken before, and when Urban Meyer left the Jaguars last year, you spoke very much to sort of personal conduct and leadership. And I just wonder if I could, and I know it's a complex situation, get your thoughts on the handling of a couple of things that have, been in the news of the NFL a lot recently. That's one, the Cleveland Browns and Deshaun Watson, and two, the Buffalo Bills and the Matt Ariaza case recently. Two very different ways of handling things. But what standards do you think that the league should, or the team should be holding these players to? And if you were in charge of one of these teams or something like this has happened, what would your thoughts be on how best to approach it? I'm just really interested with the wealth of your experience.
The teams should take on responsibility for managing their organizations how they wish to manage them, rather than just saying, well, we'll leave it up to the league. The league is simply a compilation of 32 separately owned businesses. In other words, every single person at the league office is really an employee of those 32 teams. The league is a compilation of 32 teams, 32 businesses. I think it should be up to each business to comport itself in the manner it believes appropriate. And, to answer your question very directly about how I would have handled this, what I would think others at other teams should do is to be very direct and very clear with management and ownership of those teams as to what they want their teams to be doing. Right now, I'm talking about other employees. If you are the president of a team, if you are the CEO of a team, if you are the GM of a team, if you are in any role with a team, don't keep silent. Share your views.
That's really interesting to know. It's such a complex thing, really. I know you've got many hats, as I mentioned. Obviously, your role as executive in the league was just, the first act maybe of your career in sports. I know you're involved in basketball these days, and you're also a CBS analyst. I mean, what is it about sport that makes you want to just keep contributing and playing a part in it? Why can't you stay away, basically, is my question.
I think sport has the power to unite. Does it always? Of course not. Can it be divisive? Yes, we've seen that. But when I looked out in the stands during those decades with the Raiders, and I saw people of different races, ethnicities, religions, no religion, different ages, different socioeconomic status, different genders, united in their shared passion for the hours of those games. It showed me the power of sport to unite. There were times I would look down and an octogenarian from an affluent suburb is hugging in glee a 14-year-old from the part of town in which that octogenarian may never have been. And they were hugging, they were sharing a moment of ecstasy or a moment of misery. Sport has the power to unite, and we got to get back to using it for that reason.
Oh, very well said. I feel like we should have you as president of all sports, if that's even a role. Yes, definitely. And finally, and I do mean finally this time, what do you think is the secret to your success?
The advice my mother gave me factors in very heavily. To thine own self be true. Because my biggest mistakes, my biggest bumbles and stumbles, and to use a football term, fumbles, have been when I've tried to be something or be someone I am not. Be yourself. Hard work matters. Hard work really matters. So my advice to others, irrespective of gender, is work hard. Work as hard as you can. And when you think you can't work any harder, find a way to work harder. That helped me.
Oh, incredible to speak to Amy. And suffice to say, we did speak for a lot longer than what you just saw. So do make sure you like and subscribe and download the Her Huddle podcast, wherever you get your podcast, to hear an extended cut. Because Phoebe, as you can imagine, there were plenty more nuggets from Amy. Just incredible to hear how, although she was the first, she doesn't really think of her gender when it comes to her job. She was just doing the job and doing it to the best of her ability.
Absolutely. And really, when you're someone within an organization, you don't want your gender to be a part of it. Your gender, your race, whatever your beliefs are, you just want to be the best at what you do. And I think the organization, Al Davis, were brilliant in making sure that she had the freedom to be great at what she does.
Al Davis as well was pretty revolutionary when it came to his hiring practices. I mean, Amy mentioned it there. It didn't matter to him what you looked like, what your gender was, where you were from. It was really about ability. And that really changed things throughout the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, they were one of the first organizations, Al Davis specifically, to open that door to people. I mean, one of the things that's tough is to be someone in that space. You bring someone that doesn't look like everyone else or yourself into that space, and you say, hey, look, this person's great at what they do, and it allows everyone else to think, oh, well, this is okay. With anything, nobody wants to be the first to do anything, and I think they were really trailblazers in their own right in getting that done.
And it's a risk as well, isn't it, if you are the likes of Al Davis, of bringing someone in, because it's, you obviously you back the people that you bring with you.
Yeah, massively. I mean, and look at where that's come, right? So how many firsts we've had within American football, within the NFL. Sarah Thomas as an official. I know that Amy Trask talks about that and what a big deal that is, because the NFL wouldn't put someone in that position who wasn't qualified. You get Katie Sowers going to a Super Bowl, Coach Lowe. I mean, all these firsts happen and no one's done them before, but once it's happened, everyone's like, all right, come on, let's get more diversity of thought in this building.
And that is something that comes up and up again when you speak to these incredible women in the sport. It's like, yeah, I was the first, but I can't wait for it not to be a big deal. And we'll hear that throughout this series. I know one thing that Amy said that really gave us both an immense amount of validation was the whole, she never had a plan. She's been making it up, just going with the journey, because I can speak from my experience. And more when you look at you, if you tried to plan out this career between kabaddi and NFL flag and playing for GB and a World Championships, could you have plotted a course?
No, I feel totally validated by everything that she said. I mean, my goodness, I never thought I would be standing right here talking to you, talking about NFL and incredible trailblazers within this sport. I mean, I think there's an element of knowing what you're passionate about, but my goodness, let's just throw it all out there, see what the universe gives us, take chances, take risks, take opportunities that come our way, and you never know what could happen.
Yeah, great advice no matter who you are and what you do. And don't forget, I mean, that's all we actually got time for on this edition of Her Huddle, but there's plenty more coming your way. Don't forget, every Tuesday throughout the NFL season, you can join the NFL Review Show to catch up on all the action from Sunday night. And then we are here on Thursdays with these brilliant women from around the NFL, plus that podcast for the extended edition of these incredible chats. You can like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. But Phoebe, I think the one thing we've learned today from Amy,
Be yourself, be authentic.
yeah, to thine self be true, as she said. We'll see you soon for more Her Huddle. Goodbye.
Sky Sports NFL. Feel it all.